But he made it. He made it. He grabbed hold of that ladder, and while my hope was waning that he was going to make it onto the train, I saw his hands come up onto the ladder, and then the side of his body, a leg come up over the side of the car, and he crawled up onto the car and he laid there on his stomach for a while. And I'm
Like a
thinking,
movie.
Yeah, like Mission Impossible.
yeah, yeah, what an effort. And then he was like 3 cars back from me, and he was holding up his hands like that, and he was showing me that when he grabbed, well, when he went down into the rocks, that he had busted the palms of his hands open, and this blood coming down
Yeah.
his arms like that. And I thought we were going to be content to ride 3 cars apart in the middle of these flat cars for everybody to see.
Hello, welcome back. I'm Andreea Parc.
And I'm Alexa Dumitru.
And this is Alive Again podcast. Is a podcast where attorneys and other professionals meet to discuss real life challenges and how our decisions shaped our journeys. Today we have with us Celeste Johnson and Bobby Young. It was a pleasure to meet Celeste. They co-wrote this book. It's about an Odyssey of Becoming, the summer of 1972. And I am incredibly grateful that you're here with us. Thank you so much.
A pleasure.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to meet you at the Renewal Summit and all the different authors that I was surrounded by. It was awesome. And I want to give a shout out to Susan Myers, who called you so that I could set up this podcast. And so I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, so we met, as you mentioned, we met 2 weeks ago at the summit, the Three Tomatoes annual meeting with all the authors. And Susan Myers is one of them. And last week we had the great Cheryl Benton and the podcast. And it's great to meet you. I can't wait for you to share the story of bringing together this amazing book. And then we're going to have Bobby share some stories.
It was right during COVID, and it was 2020. And, there was really nothing to do. And then I was kind of poking around and looking at how people, were writing stories and how to write a story. And then I was going to write my own memoir. However, I kept thinking about Barry and Bobby and their story and how important it was, how fun it was, and how good Bobby was as a storyteller. And he still is a really good storyteller. And so I called Bob and said, what do you think about finally writing your memoir? Because both Barry and Bobby were like telling these stories over and over, and they were entertaining all of these people, and they would laugh. And it wasn't just the old people like us, it was young people as well, getting a chuckle from their stories. And so I said, well, let's get together and sit down and write this book. So it did take us 3 years to do it because we'd only meet once a week. And I started out by taping them, and then eventually it just evolved so we could just write and edit. And Bobby, as you well know, is an awesome writer as well. And so that kind of caused a little bit of tension because both of us wanted, to write. And so we'd have to change things. But also what was funny was that you have to realize that when we wrote this book, it was when they were in their 70s. And that kind of blows my mind too, that you have these old men trying to recall what happened 50 years ago. And then they had to have their beers too in front of them.
Of course. You can't
Yes,
have a good story without a beer.
that's right. And so they would go on, and then they would argue. And then sometimes I would have to try to negotiate which story might have been the true story, um, just because they were both so passionate about their side. So that's,
And probably because the stories evolved over the years.
Well, Barry would remember some things differently than I did, or his interpretation of things might be different than mine. Barry is more politically correct than I am. He tends to be kinder to people than I am. So we had to work through that.
Yeah.
It would be
Um,
really fun to hear the tapings, the original
The,
oh, you mean
for
all
the
the
book.
arguments
the
and everything?
behind the scenes.
yeah.
Yeah. So tell us, how did you come up with the title and what does it mean for you?
Well, well, for me, because you're talking to me, right? It was, I wanted the summer of 72 because in my mind, it was always about the summer of 72. But when Cheryl investigated titles, she said there are just so many titles with the summer of 72. So then we had to put before it an Odyssey of Becoming that summer of 72. And that's how we came up with the title.
For you, Bobby, what does the title mean to you?
Well, it was Barry's idea to have that title, but the way I interpret it is that over the course of the summer, we matured. We learned a lot of things in a short period of time. We learned not to be quite so trusting of people because some people have ulterior motives when they're engaged with you. And we learned to be more cautious. In the book, if you remember, there was a part where we got taken in by two confidence men and they robbed us at knife point. And at that point, I was convinced we were going to die. But having survived that, it was a lesson learned. I was a much myself. I was a much more cautious person. So that, and at the end of this trip, it had satisfied my wanderlust, and I didn't want to venture quite so far from home for such a long period of time. And I myself, I became more grounded,
Yeah.
and that's that's what I learned, and that's what I get from the title.
And for those
Well,
who don't know, can you guys explain the relationship between the three of you?
Oh, well,
well, Barry and I went to the same high school together when we were younger. Although we did travel in different circles, he had his circle of friends, and I traveled with mine. But we did have mutual friends that bridged the gap between the groups. And it was one of those people that brought Barry to where I was living. I was living in a clear plastic tent out in the woods behind this woman's house that allowed me to live there. And I was laying in the cot in my tent, dying. I had gone out with my girlfriend, who is now my wife, the day before on a sailboat, a small sailboat, and she had made tuna fish salad sandwiches, and the one that I ate had gotten warm, and the mayonnaise, I guess, went bad and gave me food poisoning. And Barry and Bruce showed up in the middle of the woods in my tent at about midnight, with me lying in bed dying. And they were able to get me to the hospital where I recovered. And then from that point on, Barry and I saw more and more of each other. We had a common interest, and that was motorcycles and traveling on our motorcycles. So Barry and I would start um, doing these epic motorcycle trips, and we brought in a third person. He was the third musketeer. I don't know if he's mentioned in the book or not. TC. But at any rate, there was a third member of our motorcycle trio, and Barry and I, we just hit it off. We developed a fantastic relationship that remains to this day. Yeah.
Yeah. And how did Celeste came into the story?
Well, I was going to Quinsigaming Community College and I bumped into my husband, who was at that time a stranger, and somehow we just connected. And now we've been married for 51 years. So, yeah, that's how we connected. And then, of course, he introduced me to Bobby and Bobby's girlfriend at the time, Christine. And, we've always pretty much hung out.
Yeah, had a lot in common.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a lifelong friendship through
Yeah.
through friendship. Yeah.
hmm And I was an owner operator. I owned a trailer truck, and Christine and I had moved to Florida from Massachusetts, um, following her father, who preceded us to Florida by a couple of years. And he kept telling us, you need to move to Florida. You need to come down here." So we would come down and visit him. I'd throw the wife and the kids in the truck and drop them off on my way by to Miami or something, and then pick them up on the way back up. And he finally convinced us that we should move down here, which we did. And then we started working on Barry and Celeste. Hey, you guys need to come down here. This is great. And they finally agreed to it, and they sold their property in Massachusetts. And I drove my trailer truck up to their house
Mm-hmm.
and dropped the trailer in front of their house. And I had to go back to work. I had somebody locally in Massachusetts that I could work for while they were loading my trailer with all their household goods. And after a week of that, I came back, I bobtailed back to the house and hooked up to my trailer and brought him to Florida.
Yeah.
And at that time, we were living across the street from one another in Florida down here. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Where are you in Florida?
In Deltona, Florida is
Oh,
where I live. And he lives in Lake Helen
Yeah, it's about 22 miles southwest of Daytona, about midpoint between Daytona Beach
in
and
Orlando.
Orlando, right in the middle there.
I was looking at the cover and reading the title, and before I got to read the book, and I was born after 72, and I was wondering how people lived and how they entertained themselves in the US, because I was born and raised in Romania, which was a communist country back then. But looking at the picture, I think that back then everybody had the same kind of
Was the mindset.
hobbies and ideas of traveling, because we've been now in Romania for a month. We came back right before the summit, and I was cleaning my mother's library, and I found some letters from my dad that my dad wrote to my mother way before they were married, between 1967 and 1974, when they got married. I'm born in 75. And he was talking about traveling through Romania. So when I saw the cover, somehow my mind went to my dad, that it's similar experiences somehow. And it's interesting that the word becoming, so in Romania, men were mandated to do military service back then. And the transformation that a man would go, those a year and a half that he was in the military service, was incredible. And somehow I feel that your experience the summer of 72 was something similar to what happened to the men in the military back in Romania. That changes the entire perspective on life, and somehow become men.
And we were right at that age. I mean, I was 20 years old, and Barry was 19.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the age where you do these things. If you wait much longer, you're too old, life happens.
Respect.
Yeah, exactly. So now was the time, and had a friend that was going to take a trip across the United States, but he had a little van, and it was Donnie, Barry's friend, and what was Bill Zarian's first name?
Uh, I,
Okay.
uh,
At any rate, it was two couples, but Barry asked if we could ride along with them, and he agreed that they would take us as far as the Mississippi River. And so we went with them, and when we got far enough west of the Mississippi River, it was time to part ways. And Barry and I soon thereafter got picked up hitchhiking on an interstate, which was against the law in the state of Iowa. No, okay, I take it back. It was Illinois. It was right on the Iowa-Illinois border, and we're hitchhiking on the interstate when we saw a police officer going in the opposite direction, and we saw him step on the brakes, and he did a U-turn, came back, and arrested us, and took us off to jail, and we didn't even know what was going on. They throw us in a holding pen in the courthouse. Then a door opens up, and they march us into this courtroom, and the public defender, who we'd never seen before in our lives, is out there pleading our case, and the prosecutor is prosecuting us. And at any rate, they levied a fine against us, which would have taken just about every penny that we had. And we just started the journey. We're only about a quarter of the way into this thing. And so the judge levied the fine, and he instructed us to pay the bailiff over there on your way out. And I'm thinking, gee, that's all the money I've got. What happens if we don't pay? Then you go to jail. Oh, I'm not paying. Then you go into jail. So that's what they did. They put us in jail, and every day that we stayed in jail, it was $5 subtracted from the fine. So after 5 days in jail, I couldn't take it anymore. I don't do well in jail. So at
Good
midnight,
lesson.
when the last $5 finally ticked off, 1 minute past midnight, I started screaming, "Let me out of here!" At any rate, make a long story short, they let us out of jail. We paid the remainder of the fine, and we came back home. We decided that hitchhiking in the United States was dangerous, and every state has a different law. Some states you can hitchhike in, other states you can't. And back in those days, we didn't know which one was what. So there was the potential that we could end up in jail at any time.
you should tell them about how you picked up these guys and took them all the way home from Massachusetts
Well,
to
yeah,
Massachusetts.
when we got out of jail that night, it was shortly after midnight. By the time they finished the paperwork, it might have been 1 o'clock in the morning, and they emptied us out onto the streets of Cambridge, Illinois, and it's just a little itty bitty red brick town. It might be, I think it had to have been the county seat because the courthouse was there. But dumped us out on the street, and there was a group of teenagers milling around on the street, and so we started talking to them, told them the story. We just got out of the can, and, yeah, one of the kids in this group worked in an all night grocery store. I don't know if you ever heard of an A&P,
Yeah.
A&P supermarkets.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah?
yeah. Well, there was an A&P there. There was a 24-hour store, and one of the kids in the group worked there. And these kids are asking, "Well, you hungry?" Oh, yeah, I guess, yeah. You smoke cigarettes? And Barry smoked cools at the time. And yeah, yeah, I smoke cools. Okay, no problem. So these kids went into the supermarket like a pack of locusts. Right? You know, bread, mustard, cigarettes, everything out the door. They didn't pay for none of it, right? So they asked us where we were from. We told them Massachusetts, and they were in awe of the fact that we lived on the coastline, and they had never seen the ocean before. And this one guy says, "Hey, I know I've got a week to burn. How would you like, for us to drive you home?" Yeah, okay, great. And so they did. We loaded up in their car, and they drove us all the way back to Massachusetts. And we saw to it that they went to Boston to see the ocean and everything, and then they went home. But that's not the end of the story. Actually, it's just the beginning, because now Barry was working at the bookstore at the college where he met this one, and um, he's in contact with other students, and there's all kinds of books and magazines that come through the bookstore, and he was reading about Canada and how the Canadian government was encouraging young Canadians to go see the country. And they had set up a youth hostel circuit the breadth of Canada. And you could go from one hostel to the next, to the next, to the next, all the way across the country. You'd have a safe place to sleep. For the cost of $2, you could be you could be fed 2 meals a day, take a shower, and have a bed at night. And if you didn't have $2, then you could do chores around the hostel. You could wash dishes or, clean the lavatory. Or if you didn't want to do that, you didn't have to do anything. But Barry and I discussed it. This sounded much better than going across the United States. At least in Canada, if we could make it to these hostels every day, we'd have a place to stay. And so that's what we did. We started in Montreal and then worked our way west across Canada. It took us maybe 5 or 6 days to cross the whole continent. Barry slept a lot. He doesn't do well riding in cars. He gets sleepy and he gets car sick, so he has to pass out. So that left me sitting up talking to the driver of the car all the time. Many, many interesting things on the way across. I don't know if you've ever heard of the town of Sudbury. Sudbury.
Oh.
They had the two of the largest smokestacks in the world there. Great big mining area. They mine nickel and copper and other ores, and then these smokestacks were connected to the smelter where they'd smelt the stuff down, and they would burn high sulfur coal, and as a result, everything downwind of those smokestacks just shriveled up and died. Sudbury looked like a moonscape. There was nothing that grew there. And from what I understand, that's changed now. But that's just, one of the places that we ended up. Another place was Wawa, which is an indigenous person, an Indian, Canadian Indians word for a goose, a Canadian goose. And they named a town after it, Wawa. And they had this great big marquee of a Canadian goose there. And there was folklore about the town of Wawa. Whereas if you were hitchhiking and you didn't make it through Wawa, it's possible that you'd never get out of Wawa because people just didn't pick you up hitchhiking there. And there was a story about some hitchhiker that was standing by the side of the road for days and days. And there was a little diner over there. And then every once in a while, he'd walk into the diner and get a glass of water and a toothpick. and he got to know the waitress. And he and the waitress would spend more and more time talking. And he finally ended up marrying her, and he never did leave Wawa. Oh,
So that's why it was really important for them to get out of Wawa.
right. And in the book, it explains the lengths that we went through to get out of Wawa.
Which one of the stories in the book is your favorite? Do you have a favorite story?
Well, I think the one that's most exciting is when we started riding freight trains. We we had gotten a ride into Reno, Nevada, and once we got inside the city confines of Reno, we looked around. It's a fairly large city. A lot of nefarious things go on there. A lot of gambling, hookers, and a lot of street people. And Barry and I we were very nervous about staying in big cities because we knew things that could happen there. And so we decided we weren't going to stay in Reno. So we started walking east out of Reno, hitchhiking. We had our thumbs out, and the police pulled up and told us we can't hitchhike inside the confines, the city limits of Reno. That we'd have to walk to the city limits before we could do that. And the city limits was 12 miles away. So we started walking, and when a car would come, we'd look, is it a cop? Is it a cop? No, okay. We'd stick out our thumb. And it wasn't long before this old Ford station wagon pulled over. This woman with a carload of kids pulled over to give us a ride. And there was no room in the interior of the car for all the kids and stuff. So she had to put the tailgate down on the station wagon. And Barry and I sat on the tailgate with our feet dangling off the road. And she drove us outside the city limits of Reno. and left us off at a convenience store, gas station convenience
Yeah.
store. And Barry and I were sitting there trying to figure out just where we were and what we were going to do from this point. And right across the street from this convenience store gas station was a railroad yard. And there was a train sitting there with four great big locomotives heading the thing up. And I'm sitting there looking at it. And Barry and I had discussed the possibility of riding freight trains earlier. And now was our opportunity. There's a train right there. So I said to Barry, well, let's go check it out. Let's go look at this train. So we crossed the street and we walked from one end of the train all the way to the end. And every box car, the doors were closed, they were sealed, and there was a reefer unit. Was known as a belly mount reefer unit. Do you know what that is? It's a refrigeration unit that hangs on the bottom of the car,
Yeah.
and whatever's inside the car cold. And it's probably meat or produce or something like that. But every car was sealed. So we walked all the way to the front of the train again, and there was two flat cars at the front of the train with truck trailers on top. Have you ever seen a piggyback? They call them piggybacks. But
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
it's a trailer truck trailer up on top of a railroad car. And as we walked by, I looked and I noticed that there was two people sitting on that car. And I said to Barry, I goes, "Oh, look, there's some people there." Barry looked at him and he got nervous and Barry, "Come on, Bob." He took off running. And I stood there and I'm looking at these people and I started talking with them and they seemed to be all right. It was this weathered old guy and his,
Percy and Grace,
yes, Percy and Grace.
and
So
their dog Pickles, who was
kidnapped.
he was kidnapped.
Yeah. Anyway, I called Barry back. And we're talking to the people and I asked them if we could ride, if they didn't mind if we rode on the train with them. They said, no, come on up. And they told us their story. They had just gotten out of the Salvation Army mission in Reno. And while they were there, another person that was staying in the mission had stolen their suitcase with all their worldly possessions and their puppy. They had a puppy, and this guy had stolen that stuff, and he had it through the mission grapevine that this person had gotten on a train and was going someplace, and these two were in hot pursuit to get their stuff back. And yeah, they were both very weathered. She was much younger than he was, but you could tell that they were suffering from exposure. They were sunburnt and everything, and all that they had were the clothes on their back, this thin little pink blanket that they tried to cover themselves up with, and a bottle of wine which they shared with Barry and I. And yeah,
It
so
really
yeah,
shows you the warmth of people.
Yeah.
Mm.
oh, and when it wasn't too noisy, because once the train gets rolling and you're on it, it's very loud. You
Mhm.
know, you hear the clack, clack, ba bang, ba bang. And like I said, we're only two cars behind the engines, and you could hear the roar of those engines over everything. But we questioned them about things, and they were experienced rail riders, so they told us things that proved to be valuable to us going forward. Like one of the things that they told us was the men that work in the railroad yards, the people that put the trains together, they're called brakemen. And you could approach these brakemen, hey, where's there an eastbound freight being built? Oh, no problem, on track so and so, and the train will be leaving at this time. So, we could go and get something to eat or whatever, or go lay down and cool our jets for a while, and then scope out the train and find a place to ride and be on out of there.
One of the things that I was kind of upset about at this point was when the book was published, I really wanted to go to Canada and try to sell my book, but because of things that are happening in the US, it's almost a moot point to do something like that. But I just want the Canadian people to know, as I wrote this book with Bobby and hearing stories from Barry, how gracious and warm and wonderful the Canadian people were. And if
Yeah,
they wanted to pick up the book to just go back in time to 1972 and just, read the stories. It's just incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Canadian people were very, very gracious to us, and a lot of American people as well.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah. We had made it, well, to back up a little bit, we went to the very west coast of Canada, to Vancouver City, and then we took a ferry from Vancouver City across the Puget Sound to Vancouver Island, and we stayed on Vancouver Island, which, for all intents and purposes, is all Canadian Indian reservation. And we were taken in by four young Canadian women, two of which were Canadian Indians. They were Nanaimo Indians, and the two other girls that were staying with them were, Caucasian girls, but very nice people. They fed us. They gave us a place to sleep. They took us out to the clubs and everything. Wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. Very warm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure there
Yeah.
are still people like that
Oh,
now,
I'm sure.
but being in a big city, we don't see many of them.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, and everybody has to be guarded now.
Mm,
Yeah.
Things definitely change in the past 50 years everywhere, but definitely people like that, I'm sure, exist.
Yep.
Yeah.
Uh, Getting back to the train, Barry and I, we rode the train from Reno into Ogden, Utah, and we went across. If you look on a map on Google Maps, um, there's a railroad trestle that splits the Great Salt Lake in half, and the train went right across the center of this lake. And to the north of the trestle, the water is pink. To the south of the trestle, the water is aqua green, and we couldn't figure out the reason for that. And a few years later, we found out the reason why. It's because they have desalination plants there where they make salt from the water. But at any rate, we get into Ogden, got off the train, found out when the next train was leaving. We had a very short period of time to get off the train, get into town, get a bite to eat, and catch the next train out. And when we finally got back to the railroad yard, the train had already started moving. And so we're looking at the cars going by, and the only thing that we could get onto was a flat car loaded with wood. And it was stacked with lumber all the way up to the very top. Barry found a nice little cubby hole in the front of the load that he could crawl into. But me, I had to sit on the very tippity top of that load, up there where the whole world could see me. And the railroad tracks run parallel to I-80 out there. Maybe 25, 30 yards separate the railroad tracks from the highway. And I'm sitting up there and there's traffic going by and there's people tooting their horns and I'm waving at the kids and everything. And until finally a state police trooper pulls up alongside and he's he's right there and I'm looking at him and he's looking at me. And I gave him a little wave like this and he looks up at me and he goes, slashes his throat. And, oh, that's not good. So day turned into night, and the train started climbing the Rocky Mountains, and I went to sleep up on the top of the car. Um, in the desert, in the daytime, it's very hot, but when the sun goes down, the air is so dry it gets very cold. So I crawled into my sleeping bag. Barry did the same down where he was, and I fell asleep on the top of this car. So the train had gotten to the top of the mountain and was now descending the other side. And I could hear I'm laying there half asleep, half awake, and I can hear the brakes being applied, little squeals and stuff, and the train's slowing down. And finally it stopped. It sets the brakes like that. And I figured I'm just going to lay here for a few more minutes. And I'm laying there with my head inside the sleeping bag. And next thing I knew, through the sleeping bag, I could see flashlights all over my sleeping bag. And there's people running all over the car. Make a long story a little bit shorter. It was the police, and they drug us off to jail.
Again?
Again.
Oh yeah,
Oh, I know, but this was a good jail. If there
well,
was ever a good jail.
yeah. So they put Barry. Well, first of all, they told me, you know, get out of your sleeping bag. So I pulled my head out, and there's a flashlight right in my face. So I put my hand like that to block the light beam, and bam, he slaps me in the face. Put your hand down. I didn't, at this point, I didn't know who it was, police or whatever. I kind of suspected it was, but he kept asking me, "Where's the other people? Where's the others? Where's the others?" I says, "There's no others. There's just Barry, and he's right over there." So they ran over there and got Barry and drug him out, and they got us down off the car and put us in two separate cars, and they were questioning us all the way back to the police station, I guess, to see if our stories matched. And they had to have us empty our pockets. They had to inventory everything. We had to give them our filthy clothes because when you ride the trains, you get filthy. I mean, trains are dirty, dirty, dirty. Anyway, they got us out of our clothes and gave us jailhouse clothes and jailhouse slippers and everything, and took us off to the showers. And we hadn't had a shower in a while. so, so we got all cleaned up, nice new towels and everything. We got jailhouse clothes. They take us off to our cell, and this place is brand new. I mean, the paint on the doors, everything's new. The beds in the room is new.
Like a hotel.
Yeah. so, they had a trustee that was showing us around. He was an inmate himself, but he's a trusted inmate, and he has keys to certain doors and stuff. So he's showing us around the jail. This is going to be your cell and everything. He walks us inside, and he was explaining to us how the toilet and sink work. It's all one unit. It's a stainless steel unit,
Yeah.
and it's a sink up above and a toilet down below, and you push this button, and yeah. So nice clean sheets on the bed, wool blanket, pillows. This is great. We've been sleeping in the woods. So at any rate, we asked him, well, what's going to happen to us? He says, oh, the last bums they pulled off the train got 30 days. Oh, no, not 30 days. Like I told you before, I don't do good in jail. So Barry and I we got a good night's sleep. The next morning, we could hear the key in the door, and the door opens up, and this same trustee comes wheeling in this cart, and he has our breakfast on it. And he lifts the dome off, and there's scrambled eggs and toast and bacon and orange juice and all this stuff, coffee.
Doesn't sound so bad anymore.
We're now looking at each other. It's like, I'm confused here. Have they mistaken us for somebody else? So, at any rate, we asked the trustee, why are we being treated so well? And he told us that it was a brand new facility, and we were the very first inmates there. We were the, and they were going to transfer the inmates from the old jail to this one in the coming days. And they had been running drills all week long, how to run the kitchen, how to run the laundry, and all this stuff. And we were their first subjects. So, they were trying out all their new skills and everything on us. And okay, to the people in Green River,
Mm.
it was Green River, Wyoming, where this happened.
Mm.
But they told us that the railroad decided not to prosecute us, and that we were going to be free to go.
Mhm.
So the trustee brought all our belongings back in, because like in the cover of the book there, we had these backpacks, the aluminum frame backpacks, and they had dumped it all out, all our dirty clothes and everything, and they had washed them. And he came in with all our clothes all washed, in piles on this cart, and told us, okay, put your clothes on and put your stuff away, and come on down to the desk down there, and we're going to re-inventory all the stuff and give it back to you. And the chief of police was waiting for us.
It might be a time.
Okay,
Somebody-
am I going too long? Because I could do this all day.
Let's finish the story.
Finish the story.
Because this is fun.
Okay. So the chief of police was there to meet us, and he told us it's illegal to hitchhike in Wyoming. You're going to have to take a bus south to Colorado and hitchhike there, because you're not going to do it in Wyoming. So, okay. So he was going to give us a ride to the bus station, which he did. And so he loaded us up in the police car, took us to the bus station, and we thought that was going to be it. We thought he was just going to drop us off, but he didn't. He marched us right into the bus station up to the ticket counter and stood there watching us. So I asked the person behind the counter, well, how much is it for a bus ticket just over the line into Colorado? And it was going to be like $2.50 a piece, and that's about all I had. So I turned around to Barry, man, I don't, Barry, let's talk about this. And so at that point, the police chief was satisfied. He turned around, got in the car, and left. So I said, Barry, I'm not paying $2.50 to ride no bus. I'm not either. Okay, let's get out of here. So we went outside and started hitchhiking again. And like in the book, I explained Barry is a Norwegian. He's Norwegian ancestry, very fair skin, freckled face, red hair, and he gets sunburned really easy. He doesn't tan at all. He gets burnt. And he was already burnt. He was suffering from exposure. And we're out in the blazing sun, not a cloud in the sky, trying to hitchhike. Every time a car would come, is that a cop? No. Okay, and we'd start hitchhiking. And the road that we were hitchhiking on was right alongside the railroad yard that we had just gotten dragged out of the night before when the train started up. There was a train sitting there waiting to go. And what a train does before they go forward, they throw it in reverse. And they tighten up, they compress the train. And boom, 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 boom. You can hear all the trains crashing into each other. And then once that's done, they'll put it forward and boom, 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 boom. They start going forward. And that happened. And I looked at Barry, and Barry looked at me. It was like, we got a train to catch. So, so we jumped the barbed wire fence, down the embankment, down through a cattail swamp, you know, in mud up to our halfway up our shins.
So much for the clean clothes.
Yeah, yeah. And we took off running for the train. And when we got there, the train was moving at a pretty good clip. It was rolling along about as fast as I could run. And I'm running like crazy. And I threw my backpack up onto this flat car and then grabbed the ladder as it went by and pulled myself up on. And at this time, I didn't know, but Barry had thrown his backpack up on there too and grabbed the ladder. But his backpack went up and then fell off into the roadbed. He's on the train now. He's on the car, and his pack is on the ground. He jumped off the train to get his backpack. And I don't know if you ever seen the makeup of a railroad bed, but it's all crushed granite rocks,
Yeah.
and they're sharp. And when Barry jumped off the train to retrieve his backpack, he went down into the rocks, and he busted his hands wide open to break his fall. And I'm up on the car, and I'm wondering where the heck is Barry. I'm looking down. There's a number of flat cars in a row, so I can see pretty far. I look down the side, and there's Barry, and he's running like crazy, and he's got his backpack, and bloop, I see his backpack come up on the car, and I'm looking, and the train's going a lot faster than he's running, and I'm thinking, oh boy, he's not going to make it. So my plan then was I was going to go down to where his backpack was and flip his backpack off to him, and I'll see you in Massachusetts, buddy, because I wasn't going to jump off. I'd get killed. But he made it. He made it. He grabbed hold of that ladder, and while my hope was waning that he was going to make it onto the train, I saw his hands come up onto the ladder, and then the side of his body, a leg come up over the side of the car, and he crawled up onto the car and he laid there on his stomach for a while. And I'm
Like a
thinking,
movie.
Yeah, like Mission Impossible.
yeah, yeah, what an effort. And then he was like 3 cars back from me, and he was holding up his hands like that, and he was showing me that when he went down into the rocks, that he had busted the palms of his hands open, and this blood coming down
Yeah.
his arms like that. And I thought we were going to be content to ride 3 cars apart in the middle of these flat cars for everybody to see, but no. Old Barry, Barry's a lot more athletic than I am, or was. So Barry picks up his backpack, starts running up the middle of this car, and the gap between the car that he was on, the one in front of him, is probably good 6 feet thereabouts. Old Barry takes his backpack, throws it onto the next car, and jumps onto the car in front of him. And he did that till he got up to me. And now we're together, and now we're talking, and he's like, oh, we're sitting out here in the open like this. The cops are going to see us again. we're going to get pulled off the train, back in jail we go. So up ahead of us, a few cars up ahead of us, was this type of railroad car that hauls automobiles, new automobiles. And back in those days, they weren't shielded. They didn't have sides on them. You could look and see all the new cars all stacked up in these cars. So we're thinking, we should go up there, you know, and maybe, hide in amongst the cars up there. So we got up there and we discovered that these cars were all unlocked. So we decided to go up to the top row of cars up there. And I don't know if you know what a Chevrolet El Camino is. It's like a car with a pickup truck bed. And we're going to throw our stuff in the back of this pickup truck bed and ride there. And then we decided, well, let's see if this door is unlocked. So this door was unlocked. So we rode in the cab of this new El Camino on the very tippity top of this railroad car, flying down the railroad tracks.
It couldn't be perfect.
Yeah.
Oh, it was great. I mean, you could sleep and everything. But then the train stopped, and there was some jerking motion, and now we're going forward, and then the train stops again, and now we're going backwards. And as we're going backwards, I'm looking off to the right over there, and there's a train over there. What the heck's going on? And then, make a long story short, what had happened was the engines had stopped, broke up the train, pulled a number of cars that were scheduled to be dropped off on this side track, and we were back down this side track and left there. And then the engines went and hooked up to the main train and took off. And now we're stuck out in the middle of the Wyoming desert, right? And looking around, we could see a building like a mile away off to the right, some, I don't know, great big building over there. And then off to the left, we didn't know if it was a mirage or what. Are you familiar with mirages? Have you ever
Yeah,
seen a mirage?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're looking off to the left, and there's something on the horizon that kind of looks like a town. But I, heard these stories of people that go chasing mirages, only to never, get to where they think they're going. But we decided to do it anyway, and we ended up in some little podunk town. It was where the railroad and the interstate intersected, and very poor town. A lot of mobile homes in disrepair, and so we had no choice but to hitchhike out of there. And while we were walking to the entrance ramp to the interstate to start hitchhiking, a car was coming off the interstate, and they stopped and said, "Hey, which way are you guys going?" "We're going east." "Wait right there. We'll be back to pick you up." So they took off into town, I guess, to buy fuel, and we didn't, we weren't waiting for them. We kept hitchhiking. As cars would go by, we'd stick out our thumbs, but nobody picked us up. They did come back and pick us up, and these were the guys that robbed us at knife point. And I won't go into detail on that.
They'll just have to read the book.
Yeah, you'll
Yeah.
have to read.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
We
it was
came back full circle.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Now that we're approaching the end, there is one question that I ask every guest, and now I'm asking each of you. What is one activity in your life that makes you feel more alive?
I would say that reaching the age of 72 with vigor and good health and a good mindset. Because just as you were talking to Cheryl the other day about people in Romania, the women who are 40 going on 80, like that's my past. My mother was a very young old person. And so for me, to be around older women like the women that we saw at the summit in their 80s being so productive, that is just so uplifting to me that even though I'm 72, I still have so much life left to just continue and to travel and to enjoy life with my husband. And, just that's my gift, my life.
And my defining moment was that I slowed down long enough to let my wife catch me. And the partnership that we've put together over the years has developed into what we have now. And yeah, and I thank her because life would have been completely different if I hadn't met her. Yeah, she kept me between the guardrails. And yeah, we have two wonderful kids, both successful. I've got a cop and a nurse for kids. The all-American family. Yeah, it's turned out wonderful. And I love every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us. We will link in the description the book and all the information for people to purchase and enjoy your wonderful stories. And our listeners, thank you for listening. For more guests and conversations, please subscribe and follow us. Thank you again, and I hope to hear from you more stories and maybe a different book and your memoir, Celeste.
Yes.
Okay, but I want to thank you very much for having us because it's such a pleasure. This is my first podcast, so thank you.
Hopefully not your last.
Now is the door opening for you to promote your book. Why not? And there are so
Right.
many wonderful podcasts in Canada. Maybe this is the doorway for your Canadian exposure of the book.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah,
Well,
thank you.
Why not? Of course. All right. Thank you. And our listeners will see you next week with new guests. Bye bye.
Bye bye.